Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video with Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge found here on YouTube. Alright, today's video comes from our awesome patrons over at Patreon, and they voted on this video this week, which is History of Ancient China, Dynasties, Confucius, and the First Emperor by the channel Cogito. Don't know if I said that right. But I'm excited to check this out. I love learning about Chinese history. It's one of the places that I'm still learning a ton about. And the more I learn, the more interesting it becomes. And I think the story of history, the story of the history of China is so important. China is the oldest current civilization on the world and is a major world power and has a deep, very rich history that truly is fascinating. And the Western world is very unaware of, to be honest. So I'm excited to check this out, and I applaud the patrons for picking this video. It's going to be awesome. Now, just looking at the video details here, it looks like this original video is 23 minutes long. And that's probably going to be probably too long for me to do in one video because, you know, I ramble. I try to bring up stuff, and I know with China I'm going to get talking about things. So look for this to possibly be a two-part video, and look out for maybe part two, hopefully here shortly, especially if you like it. If you like this one, let me know, and we'll continue on with it. All right, if you would like to be able to choose videos or have input on videos on this channel, then definitely think about joining our Patreon. The beginning tier is only $1 a month to get you access to that, and you can do higher tiers for other types of benefits as well. So if you'd like to do that, a link is down below. Now, down below also is a link to the original video, so make sure you go over there, support that, give it a view, give it a like, give it a subscribe, and all those sorts of things. Also, you'll find other things down below in my description, the new gaming channel, and some other fun things, so definitely check that out. All right, with that, let's go ahead and get started. Dynasties, Confucius, and the First Emperor. So this is cool. So we got, looks like we're probably starting chronologically at the beginning, which is the best place to begin. So let's do this. What do we got?
This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. Get free access to my video streaming service, Nebula, when you sign up at CuriosityStream using the link in the description. Cool. This is China. It's big.
Oh.
Most of your stuff probably comes from there,
True
and
that.
they have a solar farm shaped like a panda.
Oh,
but most
cool.
interestingly, China is old.
Terracotta Warriors.
For as long as people have...
I can't stop because I love the Terracotta Warriors. They're so cool.
But most
Can we just look at them one more
interestingly,
time?
China...
Oh, yes. Those guys got their heads chopped off, it seems. I'm sure they're going to get into that. I hope so. I love that. I think they're among the coolest archaeological findings we have. And hopefully they get into that, but I don't want to overstep them.
is old. For as long as people have been talking about history, there has been a China to point to.
True that.
So, how did China become the world's oldest continuous civilization?
China is one of what they call the four early river valley civilizations. There were four great early civilizations that sprang up around somewhat similar times. And as you can guess by the name of them, they all spawned in river valleys, which seems to be kind of the most favorable geography an early civilization can have. So you got China, you got the Indus Valley civilization, which is India, Pakistan region. You got Mesopotamia, then of course you got Egypt.
What's a dynasty?
And of those civilizations, China's the only one that's still around.
Who's Confucius? And is it ever okay to just bury people alive? Well, let's find out.
Sweet. I can already tell this is a high production like video here. I mean, the way they're already starting with 23 minutes, this is some big time production values here. I'm excited.
China was born
Cogito?
along two great rivers, the Yellow and the Yangtze. People began farming rice and millet here around 8000 BCE. Silk cultivation would follow at around 3000 BCE, and silk would remain a Chinese trade secret for thousands of years.
Makes sense why you'd make it a secret, right? Because if the rest of the world can figure out how to do it, then you lose your monopoly. And silk was the most valuable export in Chinese history. So why let other people know how to do it? They protected it. I mean, they had strict laws protecting those secrets of how to make the silk. You know, comes from a silkworm.
But these early farmers had a problem. The Yellow River, which had
Dangerous.
this nasty habit of flooding everyone to death.
Yep.
Enter you. Well, no, not you, but like you the engineer. He spent
Hey, they brought him.
13 years traveling up and down the land fighting the floods. So dedicated was he to his task that he walked past his own home on several occasions, but never went inside to visit his wife or newborn child. You built canals that led the excess flood water
Rude.
into the fields or out to sea, and so stopped the floods. Everyone was very impressed with you. He gets named king, and so starts China's first dynasty.
So this is pretty cool because if you're saying China is getting founded in a way by a guy named the engineer, you have all the greats, right, or the conquerors. Glad we got the engineer. I'm sure they'll get into it. So it's the beginning of the Shah Dynasty, but the Shah Dynasty is also rumored to possibly not even existed. That it may be mythological, and because a lot of the records come from much later about it. But going back to the rivers thing, if you want to big brain your friends there, remember we just talked about the four River Valley civilizations. So you got the Yellow River, right? And then you've got Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the two rivers that make up Mesopotamia. You've got the Indus River in India, and then the Nile River. Two of those rivers are really nice. And what I mean by really nice is easier to control and easier to irrigate with, to control flooding, because that's a huge part. Two of them are good, two of them are bad. Now, the two that are good are the Indus River and the Nile River. Okay? In Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates, and then along with the Yellow River here, are actually very destructive rivers. Now, they have benefits, but they're also very destructive. They can flood unpredictably and very, very violently. It's also why you get flood myths and stuff that come out of those regions, as they were very, very destructive. Anyway.
The Shah Dynasty. What's a dynasty, you might ask? A dynasty is a family that rules over China. If the family dies or is overthrown, a new family takes over.
Dynastic cycle.
Eventually. China would be ruled by dynasties from now up until 1911 CE. It kind of tells
Qing
you
Dynasty,
a lot
final
about Chinese
dynasty.
culture that one of their greatest heroes is a hydraulic engineer.
Love it.
The Shah
Love
are
it.
said to have reigned from around 2100 to 1600 BCE. We used to
500
think
years.
the Shah
That's like 2 United States of Americas.
were fictional, which isn't wrong, but isn't really right either. We have evidence like bronze tools, the remains of cities, and tombs near Earlytow and Yanxi that point to an urban
Bronze early
civilization
metallurgy.
existing around 2100 to 1600 BCE. But it probably wasn't an actual unified state, more a collection of culturally similar cities and villages.
And that's more common than empires in history.
It was once believed that a distinct Chinese culture spread out from the Shah to the rest of China, but now examples of dozens of Neolithic cultures ranging from Manchuria to Guangdong have been unearthed. None is really more advanced than the others. Chinese civilization seems to have been forged by all of these cultures mixing together. By the 16th century BCE, the Chinese had learned to mix tin, lead, and copper together to form bronze.
Now, automatically, if you can do that, you have a major leg up on civilizations around you. Having metal versus something else, it's going to be the tools are going to be more productive. It's going to be better for weaponry. So naturally, you're going to see this group of people is going to kind of reign supreme over others.
Warriors riding a new Eurasian import called the chariot took these fancy bronze weapons and clobbered the Shah to death with them. These people founded the Shang Dynasty, which was like an actual dynasty. Sorry, Shah, but you just weren't. At the Shang capital of Anyang, archaeologists have dug up tens of thousands of so-called oracle bones.
These are cool.
Priests would scratch questions for the gods on these bones and then applied heat to them. The heat would crack the bones, and those cracks would be read as a response from the gods.
How cool is this to be the oldest writing system in China? It's oracles, it's hieroglyphics, and they're like mystical. The first writing we have in China is written on these bones. A lot of like pelvic bones. I know turtle shells are part of that too. And they would write on them, put them in it'd be like a question. Think of it as like an ancient 8-ball. And you write a question or something you want advice on, throw it in the fire, and then it cracks because the heat spreads the bone. And then if the cracks go a certain way, a shaman determines that to mean an answer or something. Now, the reason that this is the oldest writing we have from them is not because necessarily this was the only thing that they wrote, but it's on bone. So it's far easier to preserve than if you had something even close to resembling like a pulp paper, although we know that comes later. But that's why it's preserved so well. Go back to the oldest form of writing of any place in the world that we have is cuneiform out of Mesopotamia. One reason why that's the oldest one we have is because it was written on clay tablets that they fired and preserved, and that's way better than doing on something that's biodegradable.
The incredible thing about these oracle bones is that the questions were written on them. The Chinese independently invented writing, something that's only been done around 5 times in human history.
And generally only done in agricultural societies, specifically ones that were around river. Can't have agriculture without water sources like that with these kind of rivers. Now, what is the connection between developing writing and agriculture? It's pretty simple, actually. Agriculture and gathering food, I should say in general, is a very time-intensive process that in hunter-gatherer days could take, again, a lot of time and a lot of people in your society. Once agriculture was sort of invented, and what I mean by that is domestication of plants and animals and irrigation, that then allowed more production of food, which also required that not as many people in your society have to work in growing food, which means those people can use that time to research or develop other skills, one of those being writing. Now, one of the things you find with writing nations too is, besides this oracle bone thing, what we usually find in the oldest writing systems, like in cuneiform, the oldest one we have, what they were writing about was usually had to do with trade or agricultural inventory, right? Like when we finally cracked the code of cuneiform, I'm sure people were all excited and hoping to find this ancient wisdom. But what we actually found was receipts, of goats being traded or something like that, which is probably disappointing, but at the same time, it makes sense, right? That's why writing would be invented. Or in this case, try to find some mystical answers to questions.
These bones have recognizably Chinese characters. We can still read a fair amount of them. This
That's
script
cool.
on the oracle bones is the ancestor of modern Chinese. The last of the pre-imperial 3 dynasties is the Zhou, who overthrew the Shang around 1045
I think you say
BCE.
Zhou, right?
They would still be
think you say
there
Zhou.
nearly 800 years later.
Correct me if I'm
China's
wrong.
later dynasties wouldn't last half as long. The Zhou came from the
Let's go back to that.
later. China's later dynasties wouldn't last half as
So here, and this is actually pretty good for me to get the time span of these. So again, I've heard the Shah might not even actually exist. We got the Shang and the Zhou, the Qin, which is the first empire. That's an interesting story, which they're going to get into. The Qin, 15 years. That's because it was one dude. That's it. Okay. I do know going forward, the Han Dynasty are often considered really the golden age of sort of classical China, and a lot of Chinese people say that they are Han Chinese. So that often gets kind of called like the biggest foundation piece of Chinese society right there. But then, yeah, you got all these other ones going up to the Qing Dynasty in the early 19 teens. So you're talking a 3,000 year cycle of dynasties. Amazing. And still going. Although it's not in a dynastic form, the civilization's still there.
long. The Zhou came from the Wei Valley and were vassals to the Shang. But getting tired of that, they called up their armies, marched into Shang territory, and whooped them at the Battle of Muyi. The defeated Shang king fled back to his palace, had himself a little bit of a cry, and then burned the palace down with himself inside.
One thing I just want to make a prediction, not a prediction necessarily, but something I'm hoping they're going to get into, is how the Zhou justified them overthrowing the Shang is an interesting thing, which brought on what's called the Dynastic Cycle, which is basically the structure that was supposed to describe why dynasties come and go. And it also has some semi-supernatural causes that they tie with them. I'm going to give the video a chance to possibly get into that, though.
Pose
It's
a
really
question to the Chinese. The Shang ruled because heaven had given them the right to rule.
Okay, got it.
How could the Zhou just come along and overthrow them? Surely the Zhou were in the wrong here. Luckily, the Zhou had an answer. Heaven had dumped the Shang.
Nailed it.
Why?
Okay, they got it. Awesome. I'm so glad they did this. The Dynastic Cycle is one of the most, maybe the most important cultural thing you can learn about Chinese civilization, because it was used to, again, describe the rise and fall of dynasties, natural disasters, all kinds of different things. So I'm going to go back 5 seconds because I totally overstepped them. But I hope you're taking notes. We got a quiz after this.
Wrong here. Luckily, the Zhou had an answer. Heaven had dumped the Shang. Why? Well, according to ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian, the last Shang king may have hosted some festive orgies and written some extremely pornographic poems and tortured a bunch of people and maybe, just maybe, built himself a giant alcohol lake and inside of previously said alcohol lake built a meat forest. Heaven frowns on that kind of behavior. This resulted in the Shang losing heaven's...
Those are the thing. I think they also accused them possibly of cannibalism. Don't quote me on that, but I want to say that maybe was a thing. I could be wrong, though.
Mandate, which heaven was happy to transfer to a more virtuous people, like the Zhou. From now, heaven would throw storms, earthquakes, and peasant uprisings at rulers that it saw as unfit. If rulers didn't listen and change, the mandate of heaven would fall from their grasp and into another's. The mandate of heaven became central to Chinese politics, as different dynasties lost and claimed the mandate for the next few thousand years. Under the Zhou, China's first classical texts were written. Irrigation and flood control spring up, along with a large bureaucracy. A network of canals were built to transport food and luxuries. Zhou elite families could live in fancy walled cities and enjoy poetry and silk clothing, while commanding large armies and taxing the peasants to death.
Okay, so you see the purpose of these dynasties. I want to go back a little bit to what you saw about the mandate of heaven. There, it also, like the kind of talked about there, it also includes explanations for natural disasters. Talked earlier about how, like, the Yellow River floods and how destructive that is. Some people might take that as a sign that the current dynasty is doing wrong. Okay, is doing wrong. They are neglecting their duties, they're oppressive, they're worldly, all kinds of different things, right? And that these natural disasters were signs of that. Does that make sense? So, like, why did let some of these natural disasters happen? Because your dynasty has lost the mandate of heaven. Now, you see that. So if you see an earthquake happen, some people might take that as almost like motivation or something and saying, all right, now we have our justification. That dynasty is bad. Let's go ahead and take them over. Right? And so it just explained all the bad things that would happen. They would tie to this mandate of heaven. If there is bandits roaming the countryside and robbing people on the Silk Road or something like that, you could tie so many different things to it as the mandate of heaven. And again, competing groups that will probably already had a problem with the current dynasties, the rulership, would use that as a way to justify them overthrowing something. But then in turn, somebody would do the same thing later. And the dynastic cycle, of course, went on for millennia.
It was a time of immense change. Iron appeared in China around the 9th century BCE, about 1,000 years later than in the Middle East. But the Chinese quickly became experts. Europe and the Middle East could not figure out how to melt iron, and so were forced to use wrought iron, which is terrible. By the 4th century BCE, the Chinese were using heat-resistant clay in their furnaces, which allowed them to reach temperatures of over 1,537 degrees Celsius. So they could liquefy iron and cast it into molds. This technology wouldn't reach Europe for another 1,800 years. This gave the Chinese much stronger tools and weapons that could be produced on a massive scale.
Now, they will not have to interact with Europeans and use this against Europeans until millennia later. And unfortunately, by them, the Industrial Revolution happened and Europeans had advanced past that. But you can see at this point, they're the technological leaders of the world right now.
Trade kicked off as the population soared to 15 million and cities turned into manufacturing centers. Chinese silk has been discovered as far away as Germany in the 6th century BCE, suggesting that the famous Silk Road was already emerging.
Now, no individual traders really travel on the Silk Road. I mean, it's huge. It's huge. It's done by intermediaries. So that those actual face-to-face interactions don't happen. We start seeing them a little bit later. I know there are some like Roman accounts or Chinese accounts of Romans coming in or Romans with Chinese accounts. Very, very rare and just not a very efficient thing. You're better off, using middlemen, which of course drives the prices up. But
the Zhou started using money, which was a novel idea at the time. It was shaped like knives or spades, which seems inconvenient, but they were figuring things out.
It's useful
The
though.
Zhou kingdom had
How
an issue,
good would it
though.
be to have your how good would it be to have your money actually have like a use? My money is also a knife. It can be used for stuff.
It was very decentralized. It was a feudal state, so the king handed out his lands to lords. But these local lords began to amass more and more power,
Yeah.
and the Zhou began to lose control of their own kingdom.
As is
In
the story of feudalism.
1771 BCE, the Zhou capital was sacked, and they fled to a new capital at Liaoyang. The Zhou still had about 500 years left in them, but at this point they were just puppets to their much more powerful vassals. This ended the Western Zhou period and began the Eastern Zhou period. This period is divided into two parts, both named after the historical texts that record them, the Spring and Autumn Annals and the Warring States Annals. At the beginning of the Spring and Autumn period, 148 states were all fighting to be top dog. This whittled down to about 30 or so, and then the highly volatile Warring States period brought it down to 7, and then 3, and then finally 1.
Now, one thing you should ask yourself is, okay, it starts with like 100 different competing things. What do you think is going to be the most important factor for one of these states to emerge over all the rest? Because this is going to be the first time any group has direct central control over all of China, which is with the state that's going to win out here. I'll let them get into that. It begins kind of the first empire or Chinese empire.
But troubled times bring new ideas. At around the same time, the warring city-states of ancient Greece gave us Socrates, and the competing Vedic kingdoms of India brought us Mahavira and the Buddha. In ancient China, the most important philosopher in East Asian history is about to be born.
Confucius.
Master Kong, or Confucius as he is known to us, lived a fairly uneventful life. A failed civil servant, dying in 479 BCE without ever having wielded any real power or influence.
Right.
But he had managed to gather a small group of followers who recorded his sayings in the Analects.
Yeah, what you find with Confucius is, he's not going to be a leader, but one thing he did do and took pride in was being an advisor. He felt he had a lot of good, and I'll let him get into this, but a lot of good advice for people. So he's really seen as like an advisor.
Confucius's philosophy was concerned with the chaos that was destroying China. He wanted to restore order to a world that was falling apart. To do this, Confucius advocated a system of 5 hierarchical relationships. The 5 relationships
You
were
should know these.
ruler to subject, husband to wife, father to son, older brother to younger brother, and friend to friend. The younger partner was always supposed to respect and honor the older or a more male partner. Yeah, Confucius, as a man from thousands of years ago, wasn't really great when it came to women's. So keep that in mind. Most of these...
Chinese history is full of inequality amongst genders. It's just been a long thing, and it has a core foundation with Confucianism, which again is nearly 2,500 years old, right? By the way, they didn't really say it, but the 5 relationships, let's go back to those real quick.
The 5 relationships were ruler to subject, husband to wife, father to son, older brother to younger brother, and friend to friend.
And of those personal relationships you have with somebody in your family, the whole respecting your elders is the key. And Confucius, in a way, is kind of saying that the key to social stability in general is people basically respecting their elders and their wisdom. And if you do that, society will just stay together. It will stay together. It's like the core thing. And once you lose that, then your society falls apart.
The younger partner was always supposed to respect and honor the older or a more male partner. Yeah, Confucius, as a man from thousands of years ago, wasn't really great when it came to women's. So keep that in mind. Most of these relationships were within the family, with the father holding the highest position. This led to a tradition of filial piety, still important in East Asia today. Filial piety means to be good to one's parents, to respect them, to follow their orders, and to act in a way that positively reflects on them. It worked the other way too. Parents were supposed to provide the best care possible for their children and make sure they were safe and their futures secure. Within this
So what you see there is it's not a one-way street. Okay? It doesn't mean that the elder can be a bad leader and just be respected. They're still supposed to give good leadership, good guidance, good experience, right? It doesn't give you permission to act poorly. So there is it is kind of a two-way street, right? And that same relationship also dealt with the whole subject to ruler. A ruler has a justified position of power, but doesn't mean they can be a bad ruler. Okay, they still need to like earn that respect in a way and be a good ruler. And of course, what Confucius is going to try to do is try to give advice: is how do you be a good ruler? How do you earn that respect from the people? Filial piety, by the way, the whole respect for your elders, that is the most important social relationship. Like I was saying, we had that title, that the term filial piety. Probably seen it on a test or two before.
System,
I know it's on
family
mine.
came before anything else. Confucius emphasized a concept called ren, which roughly translates to benevolence or humanity. This virtue was key to Confucius's golden rule, which is, do not do unto others what you would not wish done to yourself.
Makes
Confucius
sense.
believed that if everyone followed their role and acted with benevolence, then society would work perfectly. The ruler especially needed to be benevolent because they were the one that set the example for everyone else. People were only stealing or warring because their rulers were greedy and violent. Confucius said, in administering your government, what need is there for you to kill? Just desire the good yourself and the common people will be good.
Easily stated, maybe overstated, right?
Confucius was a fairly outspoken critic of the powerful of his day. Maybe his most revolutionary idea was that the government should work to benefit the people and should be open to everyone, not just nobles. This evolved into a new concept, the civil service examination.
Another huge thing, man. They're nailing bam, 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 everything that's good there. So again, if the rulers need to be benevolent, intelligent, wise, then the rulers they're going to have to develop those skills, right? And becoming a ruler in a way needs to be justified by your demonstration of that benevolence and that wisdom. So enter then the whole idea that your leader should be well educated and demonstrably so.
Centuries after his death, the Han Dynasty government would establish examinations based on Confucian texts that all government officials would need to pass. Any male could take these examinations. This meant that careers in government were open to the best and brightest men.
Now, let's remember this too, though, okay? So it sounds like there's a lot of social mobility available here, because technically speaking, these civil service exams that you could pass to get into a government position are open to anybody. But it's going to be very hard if you are a poorer person to do well on this test, because first off, it's incredibly challenging. The rich, the people that take this exam, they spend years and years studying and practicing for it, and often take it multiple times. So what that means is, like, if you are a wealthier person, you are definitely going to have a better advantage because your family can probably afford tutors and that kind of stuff. But if you're poor or, don't have a lot of that free time, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Maybe not impossible, but it's going to be harder if you don't have, again, all the time to be able to do that. Maybe study professionally, full-time student, get a professional tutor and that sort of thing. That's hard. Now, another thing about the civil service exam though, it's also known for being corrupted. People could find ways to cheat or bribe and that kind of stuff. But nevertheless, it's still a very pretty admirable thing in a way to look at in ancient times, of having some type of social mobility and like filtration system of trying to rid your government of corrupt officials and unwise and just unintelligent people in charge, because it is hard to pass this thing. It's really hard. I've heard of this. It can take days. They basically lock you in a room. There are stories of people that have died of exhaustion dying in this test. So next time you take SAT, ACT, think about what the ancestors of people did, and because you're probably not going to die taking your ACT.
This exam-based system was in place in China thousands of years before anywhere else. Confucius wasn't the only philosopher traveling around China at this time. In fact, it was the golden age of Chinese philosophy, often called the 100 Schools of Thought. It saw the rise of a school known as legalists. They disagreed with Confucius' view that human nature was good. Legalists argued that humans, by their very nature, were evil and could only be made good through guidance of strict laws, powerful rulers, and a strong state.
This, before they enter the counter to that, that's this legalism versus Taoism, it's going to be called, or often called Taoism, is a great debate topic to have. I do it in with my classes every year, but it goes back to the core thing that I hope you didn't kind of glaze over there. Go back if you need to. It's answering this question. Okay, these two philosophies. What is the nature of man? Is it to be unselfish, right? Thinking of others? Or is it that we are naturally cruel, greedy, selfish? Right? Because based off of that, you're going to govern people differently based on what you think the nature of people are. If you're a legalist, and you think that people are naturally cruel, greedy, selfish, then what naturally seems to follow from that is you need strict laws and punishments to lawbreakers to keep order. But let's go ahead and look at the counter, if you want to call it that, counter argument or philosophy to that, Taoism.
Only be made good through guidance of strict laws, powerful rulers, and a strong state. Taoism rose to popularity around the same time, founded by Lao Zhou, or the Old Master. Taoism is all about accepting what is happening. It's not action, but inaction, called Wu Wei, that Taoism sees as important. It's best to act in harmony with the universe and just let nature take its course. These explanations of Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism are far from complete. We simply don't have the time, but there are some links down below that you can follow to learn more.
Okay, cool. And a counterweight to look at that too, of the nature of Taoism also kind of believes that people are naturally going to do good things, right? And that governing, especially strict governing, is actually an unnatural thing. It will actually make things worse, right? And that it's unnatural. It's all, like you said, it's all about nature. Everything is acting sort of according to plan, and don't go against that, because nature's a powerful force, and it's gonna win out, I guess, in the end. But again, it's answering the same question differently. What is man naturally like? Great debate topic, and with your intellectual friends out there.
The state of Qin lay on the outskirts of what the Warring States era Chinese considered the civilized world. The Qin were semi-barbarians by their standards. The Qin lived in a dangerous world, between Xiongnu nomads and the Warring States.
Okay, I think this is where I want to end it. Ending with the Taoism / legalism debate, I think is a good one, because now they're going to get into who emerges out of the I think, but that's what we're going to do here, out of the Warring States period. So that's going to be pretty good. Also, what you'll be able to see is learn about the first emperor, and be able to, you could probably, just based off what we talked about, the two philosophies, is this person going to be, do you think would fall in line with the philosophy more of legalism or Taoism? Okay. I'm prepping you with your homework question you're going to have in your next episode, okay? Was the first emperor be more of someone that would follow legalism or Taoism? All right. Anyway, this is a good place to end, I think, because it's kind of a natural break. We're about halfway, basically halfway through the video too. So that's going to be great. So let's look out for part 2. I definitely want to do this. I love this stuff. It's so great. There's so many interesting lessons that you find with it. I want to add with one other question I like to present to my students, and I meant to put this back with the filial piety kind of thing. And I was doing this. I like to do this question that I ask my kids. So I'm in the United States, and it's a good kind of starter question. Open the discussion when you're about to introduce these philosophies with Confucianism, legalism, Taoism, and it's this. It's all right in America. What do we usually do with our elders, like our grandparents and stuff, when they can no longer really take care of themselves anymore? Right? They're too old. They're probably too old and a little bit frail. What do we do with them? And most of the time, one of the first couple responses I get from the class is someone saying, "Well, we usually put them in a retirement home, right? So they can get the care that they need and all that stuff." And I'm like, "Yeah, doesn't everybody kind of agree?" And usually they do. I say, "Okay, if you were from a culture that maybe believed in filial piety, or like a Chinese culture, any kind of culture maybe that did that, also had that issue, if you were to find one of these ones, you would never see somebody like here, like a place that practiced Confucianism. You would never see a family send their elder to a retirement home. You would never see that. It would be the utmost disrespect, because your elders are the ones you respect most and care for. So what do you think they do? And that's what I would ask them. They say, well, you take care of them, right? You're the child of that elderly person, right? You should be taking care of them through the end of their days and learning from them in their, wise final years of life. And it gets my kids are always like, man, we're kind of crappy to our elderly, aren't we, in America? I'm like, well, it's an interesting comparison of looking at these East Asian cultures and how they view the elderly versus the West. So anyway, I think that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. This video is great. I look forward to checking out more of it. The original video is down below if you want to watch ahead. That would be great too. I already put a homework question is, do you think the first emperor, after you're going to learn about him shortly, would have been more of a legalist or a Taoist? Okay. Anyway, you can check that out. Go ahead if you want. And here shortly, I'll pick up with a part 2. All right, with that on the way out, this was picked by our patrons. So if you'd like to join Patreon, just one more plug. Link is down below. You can get started over there. And love to have you be a part of our community. Regardless, though, thank you of being here and being part of the history community here on YouTube. And hopefully we can keep growing it and make it the biggest community that we have in all of YouTube. All right, and with that, we'll see you all later. Bye.